All right, for the second part of this unit, we're going to take a look at how to do validation in PHP. All right, so we're going to validate, we're going to turn off the JavaScript validation. This two could be redundant. And if the JavaScript validation is on, it doesn't let me do anything. I can't save my form. I can't do any of that stuff and go to PHP with bad data because the JavaScript gets in the way. If you downloaded 5B, hopefully I'll have a new one in the future, but the validate wait data function is got all its placeholders, but it's missing its parentheses. And the other thing I want to change is I'm going back to the waits cases, and I was looking at this when I first opened it up, and it's been since like last week since I looked at this. And I said, what, gee, the delivery date's been commented out. Did I do that on purpose, and what was I doing? And then I ran it and still calculates it. But remember, I was struggling with myself about where do I put this calculation. And right now, the calculation, we shifted it to the view. So I'm going to the results view. I uncommented that to do the calculation again in the cases file. Then going back to the into the view. And here's the function call. And it just happened to me. I looked at it and said, why would you comment that out? Or I looked at it and said, where's the delivery date? Why isn't it here with all the other calculations? Because I called a function inside. Well, that got me confused. Since it got me confused, I don't think that's a good idea anymore. From a maintenance standpoint, if it confused me a week later, I'm going to try to keep all my calculations, my data generation, whatever that happens to be, inside my class by calling, inside my case by calling functions, and then just put delivery date in here. Give me the same results, but all my calculations are now done in the waits cases. So it's a little easier to understand what's going on. Also note that I brought in the utilities file. It's here. I haven't linked it to anything yet, I don't think. I'll have to look real close, but I don't think I've linked that to anything. This will make a little more sense as we're going through the validation. Have an isDate function in case you want to know whether the value you received is a date. That's primarily for Firefox now, right? Because Chrome, if we designate the field as a date type, it's real tough to type in something that's not a date in Chrome. But in Firefox, that could still happen. So that's a function that helps me validate my dates. Is it a date? And finally, down here is my print array function. Puts the pre-tags around the print r command so we don't have to do that over and over and over again. We just call it print array function instead of print r. And as long as you've included it, you should be able to see that. It's also a title case. It could go in here, but it's long enough and I don't always need it. The other ones are nice and handy. Here's my current version of title case that I stole from this site. It creates a bunch of exception words. If you find those, don't capitalize them. Explodes whatever you send it, and then capitalizes each word and puts them back together again. With an if statement to say, if it's the first word and it's not in, or it's not in the list, then capitalize it. So if the first word is the, it gets capitalized. But if it's in the middle, it does not. I don't believe this handles apostrophes very well. I don't think it does that. That's something you can enhance it to do if that's what you wish. So what I mean by that is O'Keefe and O'Donnell and those kind of things with the apostrophes, it doesn't capitalize the letter afterwards. Adding that would probably be an if statement in here someplace that would take a look at the word, see if it has an apostrophe in it, and if so, capitalize the letter after it. That wouldn't be too bad, I guess. So those have been added, but if we're going to use them, we need to include those files. We are going to use them. So let's put them both in. The validation, as we saw, is done in the waits cases. And so here I'm requiring the waits model files, but I also want the utilities now. So I'm going to require the utilities. And I know I want title case for my validation, so I'm going to require that as well. Yeah, you can put them up here. These aren't very big, so it's not going to cause too much trouble. Somebody was asking me with the Unit 3 or 4 homework assignment, I forget which one it was, shouldn't we put those require statements inside the appropriate cases? For utilities, maybe. Title case, probably. Weights, no. Because this weights file is going to have all kinds of functions to do everything that I want to do with weights. And just about every case is going to want to access one or two of those functions. And so the weights one, I always just put it up there. The utilities, the title cases, maybe those I could put down in the case for the case results. Okay. And actually, we're going to have more cases now where the validation gets done. So wherever I'm doing the validation, that's what the utilities gets used for. That's what the title case gets used for. That might be where I add them. Because capitalizing something is something I only do when I'm validating. That's only if the JavaScript hasn't done it. And the utilities, I might need the pre-tag, the print array one. So that might cause a little bit of issue. Check my index. It could be that in this version of it, I already have these included, like the utilities might be included in the index. No. But it could be. If the utilities are very handy utilities, like print R, if I'm in the wrong case, I won't be able to print R here. I have to do it later to bring it back in. So the utilities, it's one of those that just about everybody uses them. They're relatively small. Throw them in here. Where you require these things depends on how efficient you want to be and where you need them. If you find, like we might find in Lions Camp, that we're bringing the utilities into every one of our cases files, utilities, well, that's stupid. Put it in the index. Also, in Unit 3, 4, I asked in the evaluation sheet that you have two, and this one doesn't have it. Oh, this one has a very small form. That you have two CSS files. At least two.
No, Unit 3.
In Unit 3, thank you. That you have two CSS files. One for forms. There's a lot of junk that we have just to format a form. Why include it in all these cases when only one of them is going to have form anyways? So the form itself could bring in the CSS for forms. The form view could bring that CSS in. The other stuff, the standard stuff for the headers and footers and all those things, those I would bring in once, probably in here again. And again, if it's a CSS file that you're using in every blooming page, it probably goes in the index file. So let's just check that index file again. This one's not bringing in the CSS, so it's probably coming in the form. You should have two, I think, so that your form CSS is not following you to every single page. Pardon me?
Coming in the header.
It might be. Nope. Oh yeah, there it is. So that's where I'm bringing in the CSS for weights. That's the overall one. But the forms one, I only bring it in on form views, so it doesn't get in my way. And we've always been linking to them here, but they don't have to be inside the head. You can bring in CSS files just about anywhere. Thanks. That helped me figure out where that was. Okay, so we cleaned some stuff up. Let's hit the notes and see what we're supposed to be talking about here. Validating with PHP. Validation is a business class task. So you can put it into PHP and put it in the model file. That's what we have right now. The model file, which is my weights class, has my validate weight data. This class will return a true-false. Either validates or it doesn't. Actually, I take that back. I think this returns a string. Take it back again. It returns an array. of errors. Where did I find errors? I found an error in the first name, here's what it is. Found an error in the units, here's what it is. Found an error in the ounces, here's what it is. If that array is still empty, then there's no errors. If not, then we send the errors back to the form and say, here, display these. It's not an easy thing to do. It's one of the reasons why I'm kind of making, why I plan to make it a phase 2 thing for Alliance Camp. Because writing all that code plus the communication back and forth between the GUI and the business model and the server model can be very difficult. It's pretty consistent, so once you got one, you kind of copy and paste. It's not terrible. But if JavaScript's going to be on, we should be okay. Maybe we'll bend the rules a little bit. And we know that the local people are going to be using Chrome with JavaScript turned on. But the outside world, the Guardians, maybe for them, we do some internal validation, we do some PHP server-side validation to make sure everything's cool there, because they could be using, heaven forbid, Explorer 8. So here's the validation process. So I have one function, it checks every single field. We can't check them individually. It can't say can't, but it's very difficult to check them individually because we're on the server side now. To wait for the user to say save, and then all the data gets sent. So we validate it. And so we could have separate functions for each one of the fields like we do in PHP or in JavaScript. Most of them are pretty straightforward. I'm going to just bury them underneath their comments, put them into one function. But if it gets too complicated, you can always take each of these pieces of code under these comments and make it a separate function. That's possible. The controller calls a validation function. So before we submit the data, before, in this example, we don't have any database stuff yet, but before we display and even try to calculate, if the data is bad, calculating makes no sense. So this is where the validation goes. In the future, when we're updating or inserting data, before we update or insert, we validate it. If the validation is cool, then we carry on. Else, basically call the edit view again, saying, here's a bunch of errors I found, go make the user fix them. If an error exists, display the error marker. Who does that? The GUI. So we now have to communicate back. If there's errors, we have to communicate back to the GUI. Oh, I need the edit page again. And oh, by the way, here's the data you had the last time we were here. Because remember, I've left. I hit save, you leave. You validate, you come back. That form that was there before is gone. So what we also have to communicate is that request array to come back again and say, here's what you had before. Put that back in there, and then put the error markers on it. That's nasty, if you think about it. There's a lot of communication going on there. I've got a technique that's not terrible, but boy.
Just copy the old array and save it.
Pardon me?
Copy the old array and save it.
We have the array, yes, we have the request array. But what we now have to do in the GUI is say, if there's data in the request array or in the details array, if there's data in there, then put it in the fields. If there's not, then go ahead and leave them blank. We have to do that for every single field. Is this field referenced in the errors array? If it is, then put the error marker on and put this name, put this error marker on it, or this text on it. If it's not, hide it. I don't know if it's easier in JavaScript, but man, I really don't want to do it twice. And I'm still a big fan. If you leave the field, you get an error marker if it's wrong. And that's much harder to do with the server side. You got to use jQuery. And jQuery does some gymnastics to bypass us having to leave the form without and go back to the server. jQuery has got a way where you can leave the form up on the screen, go back to the server, do some checking, get an answer back without ever leaving the form. But that go back to the server and do some checking and do it just doesn't sound right to me. Especially if I can get all the logic right there inside the JavaScript. It's kind of my preference. All right, all inputs received are strings. Everything is a string. If the checkbox is checked, it sends a value, right? It's a string. Radio buttons have names as well. Sends a string. Everything. There's no dates, there's no numbers, everything's a string. If we formatted them, they're strings. We have to take that junk out before we can do a lot of work. On the JavaScript side, we have the key press event to say, I guarantee you this is going to be a number. Or we have a date picker if we're using Chrome, so I guarantee you this is going to be a valid date, or at least a recognizable date. The PHP side, we can't assume any of that. So we have to look at numbers to make sure that they're numbers. We have to, and if JavaScript is off and we're doing PHP validation, key press is off. Users can now type whatever they want. Now, the right type can prevent some things, like the number type. Won't take text in some of those. Or it wipes it out as soon as you leave the field. So on the PHP side, we have to assume anything could go bad. So I define business constants at the beginning of the validation function that puts all the limits in. There's no key press. If there are errors, then I transfer my request array to an array that I always call details. That way every form has the same code. Is there something in details? Is there something in details? Okay. And I also have an array called errors that's probably coming up a little bit later here that I always call the same thing. So every form has the same kind of names. We can copy and paste a lot of stuff, which makes this a little less painful. We still got to go through it, and it clutters up the form nicely. If there are errors, then we transfer the request array to something called details, and we store all the errors, and both those things are global variables that are available to the form. And we can say, do you have anything in your errors array? Do you have anything in your details array? And process. We can't just use the request array, because now we're going back. The request array is what we receive from a form. And when we build the new one, we have to actually transfer to a different location in our cases. And so we have to move that to a different name. Before defining each form field, check to see if the field is set in the details array. So is item, actually I extract the details array. Is item array, is this variable name set? If it is, put it in the field. If it's not, just give me the empty string. Tricky stuff. So what I got off here on the side. I'm supposed to do something and test each field. All right, so let's do some of this stuff. Using Unit 5b, define the validate weight data function. There it is. Comment out the weights.js in the edit view. So here's my edit view. It calls in weights.js, which does all of my validation. If I don't comment it out, it's going to keep doing it. It's going to be real hard to test this. So I'm just going to comment it out. Now there's no more JavaScript on my form. Still limits to what I can do. They're there, but they're never linked to anything. This is the key. Everything is linked here, right? Everything. This is where the window on load is. And so even though these functions are here, they never get linked to anybody, so they never get called, and so it doesn't matter. This is the simple. You could comment all this out. Doesn't matter. But this is the simple way to say, never mind, I don't want JavaScript for testing purposes. So we comment that out. Update the controller. What does that mean? Cases file is what I think that means. Update the cases file to call the validation function. Update the form to display the details fields and to show the error. Oh, we're getting really ahead of myself here. Update the form to display the details fields and to show error. It says the same thing. Test each field separately. Okay. So let's go to our function. And I should have reviewed this so I sound smarter, but that's okay. There's no reason to have to sound smart. Here's my form. It's got an error image. For some reason that one's not lined up very good. Nice to know the names of these things, what's going to be sent to. Got an item name. We've got a item weight pound, item weight ounces, and sample date. When we hit submit, all of this data gets sent to the controller. So here I am bouncing around, going back to the controller, cases in this case. And before I do anything, I want to say validate. So for right now, I'm just going to call the validation function. And actually, let's just say we already called it errors. That's going to be an associative array. It's going to have field name, message, field name, message, field name, message. Each field gets one message at most, whatever we find wrong first. If it's missing, we don't tell them it's also out of range and so on. So the errors array is going to come from validate weights data. We don't have to send anything in. Everything we want to validate is in the request array. Now, let's go write the function best we can. Here's my validate weight data. First thing we want to do is validate the item name. Actually, first thing we want to do is create an errors array.
I want to change it to weights.
Validate weight data. Was it weights? Is that what I said in the other one? Validate. I'll change this one. Okay, so errors equals an array. And now we start validating. And we might as well extract, right? Because I'm going to use every one of the fields, might as well extract them instead of going into the request array. So I'm going to extract the request array. Now I can start validating on a field by field basis. If the item name double equals the empty string. Could use triple equals, right? But these are strings. The empty string only matches strings. It's not going to be an issue. If the item name equals the empty string, then we create a new element in the errors array. Errors sub item name. Notice I use the field name. That way the form can then look at the array, say, my name is item name field. Do you have an element for me in the array? Now what if it's not? According to this, we automatically capitalize it. So we can still do that even on the PHP side. Before I stuff it into the database, capitalize it. I don't like it anywhere near as much as the JavaScript version, because the JavaScript version, I get to see it right away. If the user doesn't like it, they can go back and edit it, and hopefully they'll leave it alone. Here, just gets stuffed into the database, automatically capitalized. Something we can tweak later. So how do I capitalize it? Well, I have to be careful. I can't just say that item name equals item name to title case, because the item name is a separate variable that's not available to anybody except this function, because it's internal, right? It's local. Got created when I extracted. So if I want to do this, I need to change what's in the request array. Probably the easiest way to do it. I'll to look at my solution after class and see if I did it better last year. But then let's take a quick look at my utilities or title case. 3, 2, 1. Title case. This returns the new title, so it does not change it in place. It returns it. This does not do it's not a pass by reference thing. It's the way I normally write them. I'm not a big fan of those change it in places. Is equal to title case of the item name.
So 2 title case.
Probably. To title case. Thank you.
And why can't you use item name on the outside?
Because it's defined inside here.
Why?
This is where item name came from, right here.
Right, so instead of request item name, why can't you just say item name?
Because everything else is using the rest, the request array.
The rest of my program cannot see the variable item name.
This is a function.
Only this function can see it.
Line 5 creates a bunch of variables on one side of the name.
Yeah, I get that. Underneath, in the else, why can't you use $sign item name?
Because it won't permanently change. I need it to permanently change.
Okay, so that's.
Because when I leave,
It's linked, that when you use $item name, it's more of like a.
it's a brand new variable. This creates variables.
Okay,
Because it's a function, it's a local variable.
alright,
It's a copy of what's in the request array.
got it.
So if I put item name in here, I'm changing the copy. And then when I go back out and say everything looks cool, we're going to use the request array to calculate my results. If everything's cool, the request array gets used. If I want to keep the capitalization, I need to change the request array.
Any particular reason why you use double quotes and triple quotes?
State of mind, mood, phase of the moon. Consistency is probably good. Thank you. All right, now I just need to do that same process again with item weight pound. First thing I need to do is unformat it. Where did unformat come from? Is that part of my utilities?
Do you want to check if it's blank first?
Or
Probably.
Required, yeah.
It's required, unformatted, but if it's got junk in it, I could save myself some grief if it's got nothing but text by unformatting it. But then I'd say it's required. So you're right. Let's test it for validation first. Go ahead.
So if there is errors on the form, are we gonna get to the point where separately we throw it back on the form and then show them the errors?
Yes. What's going to happen, to answer your question, is what's going to happen, we're going to have an if statement underneath this error statement. Say, if it's okay, then do all this stuff. Else, we put something into details, and then we come back up here. We're going to re-invoke the edit form. I'm going to re-invoke the edit form. And I have to check my syntax, but only if it's okay do we do this stuff. Else, we come back up here and show the edit form again, but we send it our current set of data, our current request array, and the array, errors array. All right, so let's keep going on to validations. About all we're going to have time for today anyways. So back into here. If it's blank, did you say you're going to make everybody use JavaScript?
Yeah, people that don't use JavaScript.
Good plan. Good luck with it.
I'll just turn my site off so you don't have JavaScript enabled.
Remember, programming's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to do magic. All these curly brackets are optional, and I never do more than one thing. I might have another if statement here, and that's actually what's happening now. So I could start leaving them out. If you leave them out, I don't have a problem with that. I never do more than one thing. Either set the error message or I don't. Then we need to unformat it if it's not blank. Else, if, maybe, you know what, that's why I unformatted it first. So that when I get down here, it's already unformatted in my if statement.
But if it's not existing, won't you get an error when you try to unformat something?
I just have to be careful. So
Or if it's
back
not
to,
there.
I'm going back to the utility, or that's format, it can't be format number. How do I unformat it? There's no utility function to unformat it. So is it format number with a G? Can't be.
You have to make sure you do there first.
Okay, so we're having lovely conversations with the recorder off about what we don't need with HTML5. If we make this a whole number type, we do not have to check for any excess characters because at least in Chrome, will strip all that junk out or give us an error message. You type in your word, you type in a word, it lets you type it, but you cannot submit. And remember, all this doesn't happen until we submit. It's on the server side. So we don't need that. And we actually don't need this either for the same reason.
Right.
Right. What if we don't have HTML5?
Didn't go home.
Right?
Then they're using.
That's my point with not having JavaScript.
It's a good point. It's not HTML5. They're using Internet Explorer 8.
Because they're still running XP.
So,
It's their fault.
so there now, at least that much is in the recording. You want to deal with that? Turn this back on, turn that back on.
Just display a message. Why are you using XP? You can't use
Yeah,
messages.
there you go.
That's what we do at work. We say, our website will not function with your version of browser.
Yep. And for Lions Camp, do we care?
It's Chrome.
Do we? It's what? It's cold?
No, they're using Chrome. So.
They're using Chrome, but again, the Guardian may not. All right.
No, but you can just do a
I
simple
say we
browser.
But we can say the same thing to the Guardians, though, that if you're not using at least, i.e. this and that, I don't know if there's a quick way, that'd be the next thing to check for PHP or to JavaScript to say, first of all, JavaScript can't say you got to have JavaScript on. I don't know how they do that.
I'll let you know, it just got put into one of our stories.
Okay.
for Instagram.
So without JavaScript on, how do you ask if JavaScript is on?
No, because when you set your validation flag,
Yeah.
it comes to the server and it comes back false. Then you send a message back saying that you have to turn JavaScript.
So the PHP's doing it. Okay.
PHP's testing for it.
So we could do the same thing, saying if you're a Guardian and you're using this without JavaScript on, do the paper form. You're about as well off anyways as using XP with IE8. Okay. We can then check the version numbers, but we have to check the version number of every browser, right?
Most Chrome, I know, just auto updates. You have to go through some hoops to actually turn off the auto updating.
Firefox on a Mac has been kind of a pain to update lately.
Oh, yeah.
But those are the latest versions, but that's the next question for Lions Camp, so we're getting ahead of ourselves by 10 minutes here. But I think a lot of this stuff could be removed because the HTML is protecting us now.
So is the required. Slap a required in your tag, you can't submit.
Can I count on that?
Yeah, that's a HTML5.
Guess the other question is, can I count on them putting in a number type? Hey, I'm doing both of these, right? Again, I'm not doing a class. If I want it required, put it over there. Then you can't leave. Then we know it's not blank if it's required. Why are we checking for it on the PHP side in case JavaScript is off? Now, JavaScript can still be turned off, but it's still an HTML5 page. You kind of get the impression of why I don't even want to do this in Lions, because just turn darn JavaScript on.
Well, and the min and max, if you set that, you can set that in your HTML5 as well.
Right.
So it basically boils down to the only validation that for Lions Camp The only validation we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna wanna say, is PHP turned on?
Is
turned on?
JavaScript turned on?
And if not, give them a message, an error message.
Yeah.
Holy crap. Just lost a whole unit here. Tell me.
No, it's still good to know,
But no, is it? I don't know.
because
Negligibly good
because
to know.
theoretically, we're
Was-
gonna run into old pages that are still using this.
Well, yeah, and why are they doing it? But there was a statement yesterday that Adams was talking about where he went in and he removed 25 lines of code and added functionality all at the same time. I can see how. I added functionality by making an HTML5 page with the HTML min, max, required step values in there.
I think your only ones is like your AutoCap and things like that, things that you're relying on JavaScript to reformat a string, not necessarily boundaries.
There's a good point. Okay, so I don't have to validate it, but if it's there, it's going to be there. Then just title case it. So my validation isn't that; it becomes a format function, right?
But the JavaScript could do that too.
JavaScript can. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if JavaScript is off, it's not happening.
But see, if we say that JavaScript has to be on. let
I'm
the
not talking
JavaScript
Lion.
do it.
I'm not talking Lions. I'm talking about next year when I teach this class. Do I even have a validation chapter anymore in PHP?
Yeah.
You need it for just the formatting of strings, basically.
Which simplifies an awful, because we're done with this unit now. Simplifies a lot. Simplifies a lot because we don't have to now we don't have to send data back to the form saying it's got to be bad, except for one thing: consistency checks. Database consistency checks. This is a duplicate record because biological keys say it's a duplicate record. Everything else we can do in JavaScript. But we can't do consistency checks like remember the gas mileage or start date, end date. 2 fields. I can check one to see if it's a valid date using JavaScript, but checking 2 of them gets to be this ugly cycle where one's there, the other one's not, and then you check this one, and if that one's there, it's just a headache. Right? So the one thing we could do in the validation here is the consistency checks, meaning multiple field validation and duplicate record check. That still has to get done. And we still have to communicate that back somehow, but it doesn't have to be plugged into every single field anymore. Wow. What am I going to do when you guys leave and don't question everything I do?
Oh, somebody else would have.
It hasn't happened before. So the validation here isn't even a factor unless I want to talk. I change it to formatting. Okay. The validation comes back in Unit 6 when we hit the database, and at that point I can talk about consistency checks. But it requires then that you're very careful. I mean, should our JavaScript be doing required? If you want to flag it right away, I'd say yes.
If you want to
I'd
put
say
your
do it
special
up
error
front.
marker on it and
Right.
right away.
If you want to flag it right away, because some of the browsers put a little pink bar on it right away if it's required and you leave it alone. Others don't. Okay, but when you hit submit, then you get the nice stuff, but it's also ugly because it gives them to you one at a time. You submit, oh, you need this one too. Submit, oh, you need this one too. Submit, oh, you need this one too. That's annoying.
So it's better to do it with the JavaScript.
So with JavaScript, we can do some of
Friendly.
that stuff. Mins and maxes, nothing really happens until you submit. And so JavaScript can catch that, I think, earlier, which makes it a little nicer.
And from a server standpoint, it's nicer because all the validation is being done by their machine, not the server.
Correct.
So it's less of a load on the server.
Yes. All right. End of unit. So now I have to change the assignment. I don't know what's going to be left in it. Not a whole lot. All right. But I will also modify 6 to include more validation. So I would say here it's formatting of decimals, formatting of strings, formatting of dates. Probably not. Because if it's a date type, you can't leave without a date, right?
It depends, you'd have to test
Some
it,
browser.
you'd have to test it
You
in
have to test it in-
Firefox where there's no date picker to see what happens if you type it invalid.
Mhm.
Although if you use the
But if you run
jQuery
JavaScript on it,
date pickers, it will guarantee there's.
Yeah, and I don't. I'm not a real big fan of the Chrome date picker. I have a date picker that I use in my programs that I like, and there's a jQuery one. I'm not a real fan of that one either because
It's
this
not-
next previous all smushed together stuff.
It works, but
Yeah.
that's the only thing it's got going for it. It's consistent.
There's Bootstrap one,
Submit and then crashes.
just throwing that out there, wow.
What submits my form?
In Firefox, like I just typed in numbers or letters in the date thingy and it lets it submit and then it crashes.
My program crashes
Well.
because it
when
probably
it's
tries to
there,
do something with it. So sounds like we still got validation for dates.
Yeah. At least for Firefox.
So on what day is today? Wednesday? I don't know. Yeah, Monday. I will come back and show you how to signal that back again. Okay. But it only needs to be done for dates as far as I can tell now because that still is not covered. Doesn't mean we have to do it in Lions because we can use the date picker that I have. It's not a jQuery. I think it's a JavaScript date picker. What? Oh. This is my date picker. Each one of these is a spinner, so you can change each one of these individually if you wish,
Oh, that's okay.
or you can click on the calendar and change them all at once.
That looks nice.
It is nice. All right, I like it because it gives me a little bit of flexibility. It's not as easy to put in as a jQuery picker.
The jQuery picker is not easy to put in and make it work pretty.
Okay. But this one's pretty nice and it's got, if you need it, its own CSS. So that might be something that we throw in there. We'll see how it goes. And this is one of those where you can't, get to a date that doesn't exist. This is what it looks like when it's defaulted, so you can check for this state to see if any of them are still in their default value. But I don't normally leave it there. I set the date to some value, either what's in the database or today if it's a new record, and so it's rare that my user sees this empty.
Does the date picker have a today?
I think this one does.
Yeah.
So that one's not bad. That's one I tend to use just because it's friendly. I can do all kinds of stuff with it. If it's a tweak, it's an easy tweak. If I need a bigger date, I can go in here and I can even change years here and do all kinds of stuff. So it's a nice combination of them, and it seems to be quick.